This week's video picks up where last week's video finished. If you've not seen that, it's on the Nurgle Titans and Knights playlist on my channel, so go check that out. But essentially we finished at this stage here. Now what this knight is spare parts from a number of kits. Mostly the Knight Dominus kit, which I used to make a Nurgle Knight Tyrant. So it's mostly spare parts from that, but there are spare parts from a couple of other knights, some Mephitic Blight Aulers, I believe, and some other pieces that we put together, along with some cast up parts to make a demonic possessed Knight Tyrant. So we're now in this video going to work on basically all the skin and the fleshy areas that are going to tie all those metallic areas together. Because you can see there, the sprues that we've used to make the framework don't look great to be left exposed. Now what I'm doing here is just texturing the initial skin. Now all the skin is being made of milliput, which is a two-part epoxy putty. You can see a lump of it mixed together on the table there. You mix that together, you can mould it, sculpt it. You get an hour maybe of working time depending on the heat in your room. And the kind of humidity, etc. And it sets like absolute rock solid, so it's a great bit of tool. Now I'm not going to go through how I textured the skin to start with, because I'm going to create a new piece of equipment to do that later on in this video, and I'd rather focus on that because it's a bit easier than the tool that I've used already. So basically we're putting the milliput into the areas to tie together all these mechanical parts. You can see the foot there was a cast up piece that I took. Check the previous video out. We're texturing it with a texturing tool, and then I'm taking these small balls of milliput and green stuff that you can see on the table there and pushing generally 3 into a little pattern into the skin, pushing them in. So with the texture, and then that the balls in there starts to look a bit gross and demonic. So the balls are really simple. Anytime I use milliput or green stuff for any other project, whether that be cast up a piece, whether that be doing some skin like this, when I get to the stage of having some milliput or green stuff left, I either chuck it into a mould, because I've got moulds of various things and, you know, moulding up some spare pieces every now and then, or if my little bag of little balls here is kind of running low, I'll just spend 5 minutes literally rolling out some small balls of milliput or green stuff of various sizes, chucking them in a little bag I've got, saving them for later, because I do a lot of Nurgle projects on this channel. As I'm sure if you're a current subscriber you'll know, my main kind of army is Death Guard, so I've got that advantage of knowing that at some point if I make these things, you know, I'm going to be able to use them. So a lot of this project and a lot of my projects kind of require a bit of forward planning of either saving spare parts, taking up castings, whatever it is as we go. Now as you can see here, I've done the milliput across all of one leg, and I've worked up the right leg to start with, because then I'm going to work and texture that leg, then kind of move on, give yourself places to hold it. So I'm taking that texturing tool, and again we'll build a new one shortly, so I won't focus too much on what this is, but it is literally a piece of green stuff at the end that has been in a mould and a cast, and I cut a tiny piece off that mould, so it's got little lumps and bumps, and pushing it into the milliput is going to put texture onto that piece. So I'm texturing the leg first before I do any of those stages where I add in you know, the balls of milliput or any other kind of pieces onto that leg. So texture the whole thing, and in this case taking some spare parts from the knight kit, and this is, I have no idea what part this was for, but I've got loads of knights that I've built up over the few years, and every single time I finish one, any spare parts go into the bits box. I'm assuming this is a knight part because it was in my knight's bit box, but just pushing a few of those pieces into the flesh of the leg, because there was quite a lot of big exposed areas, and I thought stick a couple in, and then just a little bit of texturing round the edge. You can kind of mess up the flesh around there to really stick in that part. And then also I'm taking the end of, in this case it's a pair of tweezers, but you can do the end of a sculpting tool, you could do it with a cocktail stick or whatever, to just push in some little holes into the flesh. And again, I always push it in into little patterns of 3, because that's like the Nurgle thing, isn't it, to have little things there. So this is kind of the next stage of texturing kind of that leg as we're going. And then it's back to taking those little balls of milliput and green stuff. You know, you can do that, and you'll see some of the pieces I do later. So really working around, and when I'm doing it, I could have put a lot more texture and detail onto it. I could have stuffed loads and loads of pipes and cables, and because I've got dozens of spares, but I really did want it to feel 50-50 on this model. So 50% kind of demonic and taken over, and 50% with those spare parts in there, so a real nice mix. And you can see here, going back to the balls of milliput and green stuff, using a pair of tweezers and kind of pushing them into that flesh. Now working with the milliput, you can get up to about an hour of working time, but I find the peak working time for it once you've mixed it is from about 20 minutes to about 45. Before 20 minutes it can be a little bit sticky, gets all over your hands and stuff. After that kind of 45 it starts to go a little bit more solid, which is still very workable if you're sculpting, but if you're pushing pieces in like I'm doing here, because it loses a bit of the stickiness, it doesn't necessarily, you know, hold the pieces as tight. Now the bits I'm seeing here, hopefully you saw the sprues taken there. This is from the Games Workshop Skull kit. Two really good kits, the Skull kit and the Battlefield Basing one. Did a video on those and I'll try to link it down below about how good these things are. But the Skull kit is probably my favourite overall. Hundreds of skulls on a set. It's not overly cheap, but it does get you a lot of pieces and looks very nice for this kind of demonic piece here. And again, you know, if you were doing this as a Khorne knight, you could slather this whole thing with skulls, you know, or do like I've done here, fairly basic. Now, talking stages. So you can see here, I'm now in between the two legs. So I've done the right leg, I've done the left leg, and that has left now to be dried thoroughly overnight. So they are rock solid. One of the things you need to build like this to consider is what your working stages are going to be. Because it's all well and good rushing ahead, and I could have done both legs, and then I could have done the sort of linking part in between overnight, etc., or on the same night rather. But if you do that, you run the risk of kind of smushing up and damaging the parts you've already done. So I really did kind of think, what can I do without damaging the pieces I've already done? So I did both legs, then moved on. And again, looking at spare pieces, I'm 99% sure this was from a Knight kit as well. Just kind of a back banner. When you look at most of the Great Unclean ones, for example, the Nurgle range, they all have kind of leathery sort of tabards. I don't know if they're tabards at the back, tabards at the front, whichever. If you know, let me know. But kind of a tabard around the back there. So I didn't have to do much sculpting around the back end to make it look like it's got a backside kind of thing. But just taking that, again, pushing it into the millipucks. It's still wet at this stage, but I did use a bit of super glue because it was touching some, you know, various different areas. And now when that's been thoroughly dried, it's now time for the kitchen foil. Now this isn't something I've ever done before, but on a prior video when I was doing my Nurgle Knight Titan, so I did a big demonic Warhound Titan, someone did say to fill the voids in the model I used at the time, squirty foam kind of stuff, someone did say, have you tried using aluminium foil? And I hadn't, never tried it before. I have tried it in the background a couple of times, just making little twists. Since then, thought, right, I'm going to make this a go. Filming was terrible. I haven't got any much footage of me actually pushing it into the torso, but it's fairly easy. Pulling off small pieces of aluminium foil, stuffing it into the void that's in the chest cavity, and really it's just in there to cut down the amount of milliput I'm going to have to use to fill that area. It would have obviously cost a bit more. Milliput's not super expensive, but obviously cut down the cost is even better. But it's not just that, it would have ended up weighing an absolute ton, because milliput, you know, can be quite heavy. When the model's finished, if you're interested in the weight comparison, I will weigh the two different models. This is substantially heavier than the original model. It's also substantially taller, and I didn't realise I was making each part a little bit taller than the base model until kind of, you know, you start putting them side by side and you get there. So again, once I've got that cavity stuffed with aluminium foil, back to the same thing you've already seen. So pushing that milliput on. Now one thing I have to be careful of is holding the aluminium foil in the same place, and you'll see here in a second, as I'm forcing the milliput on, obviously I've got my fingers on the back of the model on the aluminium foil, and clearly that foil is moving around kind of in that body, and you see here it starts to split apart the milliput. So if you're going to do something like this, just be a little bit careful when you're doing it. And again, a similar thing, I do one side and then go back to the other, which you will see shortly. So it goes on quite nicely over the aluminium foil, and actually, you know, you wouldn't know what's inside that model. Definitely worth using something like aluminium foil rather than, I wouldn't use paper or anything like that, because if some moisture goes on it, it might end up rotting in the middle of your model, which, although very Nurgle, probably wouldn't recommend that as a modelling choice. Now it's time to start arming the actual knight. Now what I've got here is castings of the missiles that come with the kit. You'll see shortly I do have a couple of original missiles that are going to go on the other shoulder. But when you build these kits, you get obviously optional builds. And if you build it with 2 racks of missiles, you'll never have any spares, obviously. But I did build a knight quite a while ago. I'm going to say it was a couple of years ago. And I built it with 2 shoulder cannons and the missiles in the centre. And that's kind of your arming choices. With this one, I want 2 sets of missiles and the cannon. And the one I built recently and Nurgled up was 2 missiles and the cannon. Just change of how you want to model them up. But I took some castings of the missiles that I managed to dig out of the bits box, cast them up in the milliput, as you can see here, and really all I'm doing, being very rough. I don't really care about the kind of some of the mould lines and those kind of things, because I'm going to rust up and mank up in the painting stage. But really chopping the ends of those off and stuffing them into a ball of milliput that's into that shoulder to make it look like, I don't know, it's absorbed and possessed the missiles. Now I'm going to show you about the tool. You've just seen there the tool that I use to texture at the moment, which is literally a cocktail stick, a bit of blue tack, and then a piece of green stuff which has taken a casting on board. So it was a casting from a Glockin, and that's that lumpy bumpy skin. And effectively it's just a piece of green stuff that's got these balls on it. So I thought, well, actually every time I use it, it's a smaller surface area it covers. because it's got like an edge where the green stuff's been cut, it can leave lines in it if I don't use it quite correctly. So I thought I'm going to have a go at making my own tool just to see if it's faster. So you can see here a sort of cone shape of milliput. I rolled it in some of the balls I'd made and then spent some time individually placing balls of milliput and green stuff into the areas where, you know, that you hadn't picked up when I rolled it across. And the idea here is I've got a bigger tool, so it might be able to work easier. Also, I use a lot of green stuff rollers, so I figured I might be able to roll it on. Happy days. So this is the stage we got to while I'd created that tool, which you can see is now dried on the table. So now to finish the other side. So the aluminium foil there will move back and forward a little bit, but it won't push the side. The other side is now rock solid. And when I do this side, it should hopefully seal it in, you know, really easier. And it was a bit easier to actually work on this side of the model versus the other side where the foil was moving around. But it's absolutely the same process as I've already done. And now it's time to test my new little vices. I made two types, quite a long one, a bit of a short, stubby one. And you see there it's making exactly the same texture effect. But in this case, I'm not worried about the squared off edge, leaving lines here and there, which if you spot the areas I've done with the original tool, you can definitely see that. And what I've also done is put one of these little balls of milliput in the very end so I can almost stab the piece in. So two different sizes, two different textures. So if you do fancy kind of following the texture that I'm doing, this is absolutely a good thing to do. You can make your texture tool like this. Point to raise actually, hopefully you've noticed, and I forgot to say it earlier in the video, but when you're working with milliput or green stuff, if you keep it damp, so you keep your tools damp, your fingers damp, the milliput damp, it stops it sticking, makes it easier to kind of manoeuvre. And the other thing as well is a lot of people will say, you know, use gloves and those kind of things using milliput and green stuff, and that's absolutely the right thing. I don't. I use what's called gloves in a bottle, which is like a liquid kind of glove that was done for surgeons and things like that, I believe, but it's a choice of PPE. I've used it for years and it means I don't react to my hands. People always point out, you know, well, you should be talking about PPE. That's what I use, that gloves in the bottle. Got an Amazon shop link down below. It is on the PPE section there if you're curious, but no, I do keep my hands safe. I just don't happen to use gloves. Now what these pieces are here is some very quick tentacles I knocked up with, again, some excess milliput when I've done one of these previous stages. Just rolled the sausage in milliput, curled it around to make a little tentacle, cleaned it up with the hobby knife as you saw there, and then before the milliput on the body is dried, I'm putting a tiny bit of milliput on the end and using that to stick the tentacles into the side of the knight. So again, most of this model is kind of milliput, a little bit of green stuff on some of the pieces. Now it's time for the weapons. Now the shoulder piece I'm showing here, so I've got the cast up shoulder panel, and there's the obviously circular section where the missile pod or the gun turret would go in. Now I don't actually have the circular part to go into that shoulder, because when I built the previous knights, obviously you use those circular parts. This here I think is from a Horus Heresy Predator. I think, I'm not 100% sure, certain. It's not from the Predators I've just built. It's from an older kit, so it might be from something else. But essentially it was a round compartment that fitted the purposes nicely, and there was a nice kind of missile suitable piece to go on there to build it. Now on the top of the knight, there's the sections where you would stick in the railings that come on the knights. They get used on the original build. So you get two of these top carapaces, but you don't get two sets of the kind of railings. So I found a railing again from the bits box, and it doesn't fit this model at all, but I've cut pieces of that railing off, so it looks like a shattered railing and it's been damaged as it's gone. So I didn't want both sides looking completely barren. I didn't want to kind of demonify both sides of this to hide those railing points. So just kind of chopping things up. And if you don't have railings from the model, you could use a piece of sprue, you could just use a bit of wire, could use anything like that just to show the damage. So that's all I'm really doing, is trying to take something that looks broadly similar to what was on there originally and dropping it onto the model so it looks like it's been, you know, battle damaged. And that's the absolute beauty of doing a Nurgle model. Battle damage is your friend. Doesn't matter if you make a mistake, it's Nurgle. So sealing in this missile pod, now we've built it. So these are the original plastic missiles with a different kind of turret and a different arming kind of thing, whatever that little spike in there is called, but it fits in and looks broadly similar to how it was on the original model. And again, when I'm talking about aiming the weapons, I've kind of put the shoulder and the carapace weapons pointing off to one side, main weapon, to give it a bit of dynamism in how I'm posing it. Now obviously that milliput that I've used to stick this weapon in has splurged out the side, and that's kind of what I want it to look like, that the demon that has possessed the pilot is now bursting out, taking over the rest of the model. So using the same techniques, just smoothing it down with a bit of a sculpting tool, and then I'll use that texture piece of model and put some balls of green stuff kind of in there. So showing it there. Now the other shoulder, you're going to see how I'm going to arm it shortly. The head, in the first video I didn't really talk about how I've done the head too much, but it is literally held on by a sprue, some milliput in there, and we're going to seal it to the body in exactly the same way. So kind of repetition of what I've talked about here, but really just showing you through. It's fairly simple doing a model like this. It's just having the spare parts, having the time and having the confidence just to have a go at it. Now with the head, I've just taken one of the larger balls of milliput. I did test a few different ones in here, and this is going to represent like that big kind of demonic eye with a very strange head. So it's going to be a singular kind of eye on the model, and I've again used the milliput to seal that in to this headspace. And I think that carapace is off. It's not a Mephitic Blighthaller. It was off one of the bloat drones, I believe. Now weaponry wise, obviously it comes with 2 melter guns. Now I don't have 2 spare melter guns. I did find a couple of the Plague Marine ones, but they felt a little bit too small. This is a little bit large, but this is a melter gun from one of the War Dogs, cut right down just for the barrels, and again a nice big blob of milliput to kind of hold it in. That blob isn't how the blob ends up. I end up peeling this off later on, but I didn't get footage of that, and just kind of redoing it and trying to get the angle a bit right, but it follows the same principle. And again, the above section where the kind of scope and everything slots, I couldn't find a suitable part for it. I could have done if I spent more time, but again, so I just used that demonic kind of flesh part there. So we're kind of done. Now what's on the base here, if you watch the first video, you'll have seen I put a pilot into it. So some of these pieces are what was broken off around the pilot. There's a colour there that's from a cast of an ammo case I did. And how I'm going to base it, lots of PVA glue around the base. And what is in here is literally the scrapings and the cuttings from all the different kits I do. I chuck it into a pot, mix with a bit of sand, and you chuck it on. And this is kind of a homemade rubble. So literally this is scrapings when I've built kits, if I've removed mould lines, if I've cut little parts off, that is what is in this kind of basing tub. And I used this on a few different kits, but it just gives quite nice. What it can do though, because I'm scraping it off my hobby table, there's a bit of hair in there that I wanted to remove, so before it dries, taking off any pieces you don't want. But it doesn't matter what these pieces look like. It's you look at some, there's little twirly pieces, some it's literally might be a part of a Necron in there, but you don't see it when it's mixed in that basing rubble and it's fairly small pieces. You're putting some extra PVA glue on to seal down the parts that are liable to come off, and it gives that kind of nice urban effect. Now, when I did the battle damage, and that was in video 1, for some reason, I didn't battle damage the weapons. No problem, this is now set completely solid, so I'm going back around with a clipper, with a hobby knife, and with a pin drill to put the battle damage on that I did on the rest of the model at the start of the first video. And that's what the kind of hobby should be. If you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. If I'd have painted this model and not battle damaged it, we could have done something in the painting stage to make it look like I had. So if you make a mistake, don't worry. You can always fix it. You can always do something else to kind of come across it. And actually, I'm doing the voiceover for this video now and looking at this kit prior to starting to paint it. And there's a couple of parts under the left arm that I think I'm not quite happy with. So I'm not going to include it in this video, but I am going to come back and do a couple of little fixes to this model before I start painting it. If you see there, this is now the finished model. I am really happy with it, but under the left arm, where those tentacles are, I think I need something more up in the armpit to bulk it out a little bit. It looks a little bit thin in my mind. But I'm really pleased with what this looks like. Really pleased with the stage we've got to. I think it's going to be really quite nice and demonic and everything. Hope you've enjoyed it. It's been quite a long video again, this one. So if you did enjoy it, like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube stuff. Hopefully I'll see you on video 3, which I'm aiming for next week, which means we'll be painting this thing up and getting it to join the rest of the army. I'll see you on another video.